everyone. There are seats in the front here, and there are seats back there. And as people come in, we'll see if we need any more chairs. It is great to see so many of you here. It is, as our brochure says, it's our 15th season, which is kind of amazing. And the group, who now call themselves WHAM, because they're the ones who are in charge of the M for museum. And our two groups came together with the thought from, help me, Bob Macris, way back at its inception. And it was his idea that wouldn't it be fun to have a winter history festival? So people would have something to do in the middle of winter. And nobody had any idea we'd be doing this 15 years onward and plus. So, but it's due to the real faithfulness of the people that are sitting in the chairs here tonight that we are happy to keep bringing these to you, and the ideas just keep coming. I want to remember to thank the Harbor Table for hosting the event. They're the ones that do all the hard work of putting the chairs up and the tables and arranging things for us, and we appreciate their help. We also want to thank Andrew Grimm, our videographer. He is a local history teacher, and he always says that he likes to be here because he learned something about Washburn that he can pass along to his kids. And that's why we're all here, because we love history and we like to hear the stories again and again. Irene Blakely is our speaker tonight, and she actually gave, not exactly this talk, but a talk on women from Washburn. And it was in one of her very first years of this festival. And because it was so early on, we had no Andrew Grimm to videotape at that time. And so we lost what she had to say. And when I asked if she'd be willing to repeat it, she was eager to say yes. She didn't hesitate, and I appreciated that. And in the meantime, she was able to gather so much information that she said she couldn't possibly keep it in a reasonable amount of time. So I think she's going to tell you some news about how she resolved that issue when she begins. Irene is another person who loves history. She was a history major in college, and she said that tells you something about that she knows how to do the work, which is part of being a history person. You know, it's not just making up the stories and talking to one or two people, but there are some facts down at the bottom too that you need to sometimes discover. I won't ramble on and on because I'm going to give Irene all the time she needs tonight. So I say thank you again to you, Irene. And do I need to remind anybody about the cones in the front of the roamery? Do you know that routine? Yeah, Irene could go to the back when she finishes, if she would. If you have anything to say, once we finish our little question and answer, which is sometimes part of the presentation, if you think of something else you just have to share with Irene, which is great, I'm sure she'd like to hear from you, but she's connected with some wires to a microphone, and we've got wires running back and forth across the front of the floor, and it's not a good place for people to be going in and out. So the cones remind you not to step forward, and perhaps you could just wait a little bit and Irene can step back and join you. So that's the cone story. So, without any further babbling on, let's help me to welcome Irene Blakely.
Thank you all for coming out tonight in this icy weather. And thanks to the Washburn Heritage Association, the Washburn Area Historical Society, for giving me the opportunity to speak about some women who quietly shaped the history and culture of Washburn. I am not one of them because I was not raised here. My parents were, but I was not. I was raised in Minneapolis. And we would make trips frequently, and as the grandparents got older and more infirm, we came more frequently up to Washburn to visit. Eventually, Washburn took with me, and I loved being able to come up here and visit relatives and love the town. So when I had an opportunity to work at Northland College, I took that opportunity, and my family came from Portland, Oregon, where we had started our family together, and we came to Washburn. By way of Ashland, we lived there for 4 years, but you know, Washburn won me over. So that tells you where I stand in the community. But over 40 years, I've learned more about who I am in this community, and love being here and glad to have this opportunity tonight. I really owe a great debt to Lars Larson, whose comprehensive Washburn history books helped to paint the background of this story tonight, and also Katherine Johnson and Tony Woiak, whose books helped to paint the portraits. And to Betty Ferris for her professional research and compilation, and of course to Lynn Adams and the WHA Kiosk Committee for bringing these pictures to life on the screen. I must acknowledge immediately that I could not possibly research all the noble, creative, brilliant women of Washburn. You may know stories of your own, and you may have significant stories to tell of your own women ancestors, and I would love to hear them if you have something to share with me tonight or at another time. Also, I include references to my own family because I know them the best. Tonight is part one of 2 parts of this presentation on the topic of Washburn women. The second part will be in the summer Tony Woiak History Festival lineup. I'll start with a brief history for folks to kind of get an idea of how Washburn came to develop. The Verdon Peninsula sheltering Chequamegon Bay was the ancient home to Native Americans, but as Lars Larson, the author of Washburn, The City to Be, says, it was not a quest for beauty, but greed for resources, which brought white men to the shores of Chequamegon Bay and determined the course of its subsequent history. For Chequamegon Bay was always, and remains, a resource frontier, defined as a region containing natural resources that could be economically exploited by capitalist investors: fur, fish, timber, brownstone, now water. Small communities were established that were dependent upon these investors and did not develop their own economic and political autonomy and stability. Washburn was one of these. And it started in 1883 in Washburn with the Omaha Railroad, selecting Vandeventer Bay for their lake shipping terminal. Washburn was a speculative town site intended to house workers drafted by these investors. This economic base expanded to shipping, sawmills, and quarrying. At one point, Washburn was going to be the massive shipping center that Duluth actually became. The boom reached every area of life. Lumber camps were set up in the forests. In town, there was a building boom. Workers flooded into town needing housing and social amenities of churches, schools, hotels, commerce, housing, taverns, and the occasional brothel. There was a sense of transiency, of change, bursting at the seams. Washburn was a boom town, which then declined gradually, rather than catastrophically, revived by DuPont in 1904. The DuPont works influenced the social culture of the town in every respect. It provided work, housing, and even recreation for its workers. It also created a clear social class structure. The houses on DuPont Row, for example, featured management living on the west side of 3rd Avenue East, while the chemists and the workers lived on the east side. The DuPont Men's Club was very active, but men had to have a certain rank to join. George Sem, the superintendent during the 1950s, changed all that. When he came to town to arrive as a superintendent, he told employees, "Just call me Baldy." The prospects of Washburn declined once again after World War I, when the need for dynamite for war munitions abruptly ended, causing a huge fluctuation in employment. Washburn's economic survival began to depend upon county government programs, public welfare for the elderly, and FDR's New Deal programs. At the same time, DuPont was pivoting to peacetime production. Business was developing in town based upon agriculture and entrepreneurs who were creating innovative sources of income. When World War II broke out, DuPont was again able to shift focus to the manufacture of munitions for the war effort. At the conclusion of the war, DuPont once again turned to peacetime production of metal cladding until its closure in the 1970s. Tourism and expansion from metropolitan areas provided some recovery, but Washburn was still a maintenance community, clinging like a pine on the red cliffs between its neighboring cities on the bay. So it's against this backdrop that the history of its women is projected tonight. We know that women hold up half the sky. In pioneer times, women, it can be argued, had a significant role in the building of the community. From their unique feminine perspective, they cultivated social civilization in the newly formed town of Washburn. Women took on more and more assertive roles as opportunities and necessity intersected. So we begin with one woman's story, Jessie N. Smith, born in 1862, who was the Bayfield County Superintendent of Schools. It's a story of dedication and determination. Jessie Smith grew up in Iowa and taught 20 years before moving to Washburn, where she taught for 1 year. She was then the principal of Drummond for 3 years. Then she became the head of the Central School in Bayfield. In 1896, she was appointed as interim county superintendent and then was subsequently elected to the position on a permanent basis with an office in the courthouse. Each year, she traveled to every county school. Here's what Ruth Van Stone said about her. She journeyed by car and horse-drawn vehicle, often a sleigh, or even by boat along the South Shore, sometimes finishing her trip on foot. Ruth recalled, if you were a young teacher or pupil in one of the rural county schools, you'll remember the day when she came on her annual and unannounced visits for inspection and supervision. She corrected and suggested kindly but firmly changes she would like to see, said goodbye, and the dreaded day was over. But during her tenure, the system increased school attendance 150% and teachers by 450%, largely because of her work. She was a member of the Washburn Christian Temperance Union, the Women's Study Club, the Federation of Women's Clubs, and the Methodist Church, and she died in 1940. Next, Carrie Botolfs Hansen, who was born in 1865. This is a story of pioneering and immigrant spirit. Born in Modum, Norway, Carrie was the eldest of 3 sisters and 3 brothers, and immigrated to America in 1869 at age 17. At age 17, she married Nels Peter Hansen in 1882 in Clayton, Wisconsin. In fact, 9 of her 12 children were born in Clayton. The family moved to Washburn in 1904, the year of incorporation of Washburn as a city, and homesteaded 9 miles northwest of the city at the head of the Little Sioux River. They struggled to make a living farming in the cutover of the Jack Pine Forest area until 1915. The fellow in the center is Nels Peters Hansen, and the woman in the back is my grandmother, Gustava Holman, Hansen Holman. Agriculture agents publicized this stump-filled land as ideal for farming to the immigrants. But when they got here, they found that though the land was actually only good for blueberries and a little poor quality hay. They had built a 5-room, story-and-a-half wooden house sided with sheet metal with red cement embossing to protect against fire, and outbuildings for stock. They drew water from a spring-fed well and hauled it to the house in pails for the family and the stock. Their living depended on Nels farming in the summer and working in the lumber camps in the winter, so he was away from home for long stretches. Their only neighbors were bachelor Norwegian farmers and 2 older women living alone. So in winters, Carrie moved with the children to the Bellinger settlement for safe housing and the opportunity for the children to go to school. Well, forest fires threatened in the 1890s, and Carrie, sole caretaker of the family while her husband, known as Jack Pine, was in the camps. Well, Carrie fought the fire that had caught on the roof of the barn with her 14-year-old son. Leonard climbed onto the roof with wet gunny sacks to stomp out the sparks. They saved the house, but lost the barn. Carrie lived to the age of 94. Her descendants are the Holman, Brevac, and Ekholm families. Now we turn to Adeline Gilstead Soche. She is in the middle in the first row, one of 7 sisters. This is how you took a picture in the 1880s. A lot of buttons, and undoubtedly very tight corsets. Adeline Gilstead met her husband William at a boarding house where she was working as a maid. He was a Canadian Frenchman who had immigrated to work for lumber companies in Wisconsin. He was a foreman for the Stearns Company in Odena, where he and Adeline settled and where she gave birth to 9 children, 6 of whom survived diphtheria and consumption. 2 of their little girls under the age of 2 who didn't are buried in the old Odena cemetery. My mother was the youngest child and was 2 when her father was transferred to Washburn. She told me that her mother considered her 12 years of life in Odena as the happiest time in her life. The family started their life in Washburn on Pine Street in a large house with a town barn, and eventually even an indoor toilet. Their lives were on a progressive course until the lumber industry collapsed. Her husband William got a new job on the railroad. On the first day of the job, on the train to work in Ashland, he had a massive heart attack and died at the age of 55. He left his wife 10 years his junior with 6 children to raise, but without a pension. Adeline was resourceful and took in a boarder. She became a seamstress and tailored clothes for women well into her 70s, until her sight began to fail. Women of all walks of life had clothes sewn in the early days before ready-to-wear was common. She commented that the less well-off clients saved egg money until they could afford a new garment or the remaking of adult clothing for their children. So they always paid promptly. They knew the value of $1. When one of her sons ran into hard times in the 30s, it was Adeline who took in his 2 young children. She, along with my mother, helped raise them until he eventually got back on his feet. Deanna, her oldest son, worked for the Reese Coal Company in Ashland. In later years, she was financially dependent on these sons and her 2 daughters. She spent those later years in a small house on West 5th Street next door to the Lutheran parsonage. Her descendants are Floyd and Ada Holman family. And now we come to May Greenwood. May Marie Smith Greenwood, born in 1869, a story of community commitment to education. Born in Downsville, May was the daughter of George and Maria Smith. On a trip to Washburn to visit her sister, Louisa Smith Irish, she met Richard Greenwood. He had come to Washburn from England in 1884 to take over an established meat market in town. They were married in Downsville in 1887, but soon after moved to Washburn and built a home at 214 East 4th Street in 1888. This home is still occupied by Billy Olson, one of our friendly retired lumbermen. In 1896, after a long illness, Richard died, leaving a widow with 2 daughters, Alice, born in 1888, and Grace, born in 1892. Incidentally, Grace married Elmer Olson in 1917. She was a teacher of 3rd grade for 17 years after graduating from Superior Normal. Grace became co-partner with her husband and son, Richard Sr., in operating the William Olson Dray Line and Lumber Firm in 1946. She was secretary and bookkeeper till shortly before her death in 1977 at 84. Sandy Olson took over that job for Olson Building Materials, as we all might know. Citizens had founded a free public library in December of 1891 in the boomtown days. In 1893, the library was housed in the current City Hall, which was built for the princely sum of $3,200. In 1898, May competed for and was appointed city librarian at the handsome annual salary of $400. On this small but steady income, she raised 2 girls into adulthood. They were Mrs. Warren Rockwood of Superior and Mrs. Elmer Olson of Washburn. While books were precious and rare at that time, most homes only owned a family Bible, and May described the library in this way. The main part of the building was used as a reading room. All the books, 1,099 volumes, were kept in a fireproof vault which was not open to the public. A railing with a swinging gate, behind which was the librarian's desk, separated the reading room from the vault. Books were chosen from a catalog on the librarian's desk, and then the patron asked for the book. The librarian stepped into the vault and got it for them. Only 1 book was allowed to each person. We guarded our volumes with great care. Every night we drew heavy turkey red curtains across the shelves to keep the dust from the books. And whenever the librarian left the building, the vault was carefully locked. Under her direction, the library collection grew by half again in 3 years to 1,665 books. The facility soon proved inadequate, and the directors planned to build a new library. Well, the cornerstone of the current Carnegie Library was set in 1904 and became the culture center and symbol of prestige for the growing city. Post-boom years affected May personally as her salary diminished to $250 per annum in 1911. By 1918, however, during the mini-boom of World War I, the collection had grown to 6,058 volumes, quadrupling in size in just 17 years. May developed the library circulation just as aggressively as the collection. She worked with schools to provide materials and taught children how to use the library resources. During the Depression in the 1930s, library hours were cut, but May continued to increase the collection and create special events to familiarize the public with the available resources. In 1931, May had completed a third of a century of service, and a large framed photographic portrait of her was installed in the library. The Washburn Times recognized her 40 years of service by saying that she, quote, has been directing the destinies of the library and the reading taste of the community since 1898 and will probably continue in that capacity for years to come. So firm is the place she has made for herself in the affection and esteem of her fellow citizens, and so youthful is she in body and spirit in spite of her long term of service. Under the capable guidance of Mrs. Greenwood, the library has become a cultural agency of real value and prestige in the community and has experienced a steady, rapid growth until it is now one of the best among libraries in cities of Washburn's size in the entire state. We may believe that the rising interest in the radio and the moving pictures had stimulated reading, actually, which was confirmed by the growth of the collection to 9,189 volumes and a circulation of 28,214 in the year 1937. May Greenwood did indeed continue in the capacity of librarian for a total of 62 years of service, celebrated by May Greenwood Day in 1960. The Women's Study Club organized the program, but this was not a retirement party. Mrs. Greenwood continued as library director for 4 more years until the library allowed her to retire at 94. The oldest librarian in the nation with the longest record of service, according to the Times. At her death, many Washburnites sent reminiscences of memorable contacts with her. The Washburn Times noted that, quote, the problem of imposing discipline upon the throngs of children who crowded the library every afternoon and evening necessitated a somewhat strict and severe demeanor on the part of the librarian. There are still many adults in the community and scattered around the country who regarded Mrs. Greenwood with considerable awe, even as they remember with pleasure the hours they spent under her supervision. Tributes came from all over the nation, including letters from President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, and President-elect Kennedy. May Greenwood is the ancestor of the Olson family. These are women who are part of women's organizations in Washburn, of which there were many. Washburn has always had a strong sense of social responsibility. The first organizations were connected with churches and then with lodges later on. The first women's club was established in 1907, the Wednesday Evening Club, it was called. And it then became the Women's Civic Club. In 1974, that club disbanded and was replaced by the Washburn Beautification Foundation, headed by Mrs. Earl P. Johnson. Among the kinds of community organizations that began in the early days and created an enriched community culture were the Ladies' Aid Society, which was attached to the local churches, Sunday school teaching, of course, quilting and sewing groups, the PTA, the hospital auxiliary, a child welfare board, the Federated Women's Club, and various studies circle to encourage an educated citizenry. So not only did the Washburn women volunteer actively to create the culture and history of Washburn, but many worked on the farms or in business or for institutions. Washburn women have been part of the workforce since the pioneering days. Some of you may recognize some of these women as your ancestors. As early as 1893, Dr. Mary Sorensen opened her medical practice in town. Even earlier, in 1885, Mrs. Agnes Bakke was a midwife, having graduated from the Chicago School of Midwifery and Nursing. Ellen Thomas operated a confectionery store. Maud Picott operated a millinery and dry goods store. Mrs. William Downs was a dressmaker. Mrs. S. Kluge ran a glove factory. According to the Washburn Times in 1911, Mrs. Kluge, quote, moved her glove factory to the building next to the Larson Brothers store. There are now 4 persons employed in the factory, and about 400 dozen pairs of gloves are manufactured each week. The gloves are canvas, and they're being shipped to Superior, Duluth, Minneapolis, Chicago, and Cable. A growing business. End quote. In early days, there were 6 boarding houses run primarily by women. The Times reported on several of them. Mrs. B. Olson provided splendid boarding accommodations at very low rates of $3.50 a week. The Franklin House charged $1 a day. Mrs. A. Elliott offered room and board. Mr. and Mrs. Dalzell opened, quote, a high-class private boarding house. It was a secluded, quiet, home-like place conveniently located within 1 block of the post office and very near the business center. Mrs. Dalzell spared no pains to make her boarders, who were comprised of teachers and businessmen, to feel perfectly at home, end quote. Mrs. Peterson ran the Washburn Hotel. The Times reported, quote, it was a cold, cold, cold wintry night when it went up in flames. It was a huge building where Legion Park is. It was a fire trap, end quote. Many women worked at the DuPont box factory, especially during World War II. Olga Tast was a pioneer nurse and RN. She worked at the hospital nursing home until she ended up there herself. One contemporary said that, quote, she was a specialist in everything. She went with the doctor to deliver babies. No telling how many babies she delivered, end quote. She attended small surgeries in the doctor's office and finished her career in private duty nursing as well. Women continued to be present in Washburn's commerce. Ida Oberts and Cleo Grant owned and operated the Club Lido in the 50s. Fern Gagne ran the children's shop, and everybody shopped at Waldine's clothing store. Her annual sales drew customers from the whole Bay Area looking for extraordinary bargains. Christina Nemisto was hired to organize the immigration effort of Finnish settlers to the cutover during the 1920s. She helped form housing options for Finnish settlers who had been recruited by land agents. Poles and Scandinavians were also lured here for boomtown jobs and farms for homesteading to feed the city and increase consumerism. Now we move to the portrait of Lillian, called Lizzie, Mason Keller Brink. born, next slide, yeah. Yes, that's Lizzie and Ora Brink, a story of intrepid strength. Born in southwest Wales, Lillian's grandmother was first cousin to Queen Victoria. Lillian immigrated to southwest Wisconsin lead mining area in 1883 at the age of 9. In 1893, at 19, she married an Irish farmer, Albert Keller. Their first son was born in 1894, and although he was blind at birth, he became an accomplished musician who was educated at the School for the Blind in Milwaukee. Their second son, Lovejoy, was born in 1898, but the marriage didn't last. And after her divorce, Lillian supported the boys as a sharpshooter and trick horse rider with Ringling Brothers. In 1909, she became a cowgirl for the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. But by 1914, she had damaged her knees so badly that she had to live off of her 16-year-old son's wages as a messenger in St. Paul. But dependence didn't suit Lizzie's spirit. In 1915, she married Ora Brink and moved to the Barrens to homestead. The Barrens was so called because of the Great Forest Fire that created the sandy, scrubby landscape. Nevertheless, they farmed this unproductive land, sometimes eking out a living by selling water for 5 cents a glass. During the Depression, the federal government bought the farm for a guard station, and the CCC camp was located there during the 1930s. Their homestead was 14 miles out of Washburn, so Lillian skied into town in the winter for groceries and supplies. On one trip, she froze both of her legs. In order to save her legs, she was submitted to the age-old method of allowing maggots to feed off gangrenous tissue. The treatment apparently saved her legs, but the frostbite led to painful ulcers that continued throughout the rest of her life. Eventually, she and Ora moved into town to a home at 529 West Pine Street. People said that she never complained, despite the fact that, quote, they had it tougher in times when things were tough for most everyone. Although her hobby at the farm was target shooting, Lillian said that her hobby in town was survival. She used a palm reading skill that she had learned in the circus to entertain children, but often the result was actually scary to them. She and Ora would sit on the porch and visit with the neighbors who happened by. All who knew her said that she was friendly, gentle, caring, intelligent, and courageous, but had quite a temper. She was fiercely independent and stood up for herself. After a long illness, due to the condition of her legs, she died at age 68. Her descendants are her granddaughter Patricia Keller Balgard and the Arsenault and Doucette families. Rebecca May Armstrong Gibson, born in 1876, a story of endurance. Rebecca May Armstrong was born in Shakopee, Minnesota, the only girl with 5 brothers. She became a teacher and gave music lessons. Quite naturally, she also played the organ for the church, Sunday school. In 1901, Rebecca came to Washburn to visit her cousin, and it's here that she met John William Kirk Gibson, whom she married in 1902. Well, John worked at the Northwestern Fuel Company and later established the Gibson Coal Company in Washburn. It was a time when people would come downtown to pay their monthly fuel bill in person. Both were active in church and sang in the choir. She was also part of a vocal trio that performed locally. She was a member of the Ladies' Aid Society, which had initially been a sewing circle formed in 1888. They held various sociables, lutefisk dinners, and bazaars to raise money for the church. She became its treasurer as well, and the PTA president into the bargain. It was noted that, quote, in the social life of Washburn, dinner parties were enjoyed, and Mrs. Gibson was known among her friends as an excellent coal company, and continued to run the office and the entire business after her husband's death in 1940 until her very advanced years. Her motto was, what can't be cured must be endured. Rebecca Gibson endured until just 12 days shy of her 107th birthday in 1982. Then we have Barbara Hayden, 1899, a story of individuality. Barbara actually came from a prestigious family. One ancestor was the president of Yale University for 26 years. She was the direct descendant of William Whipple, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Barbara Hayden was born in Ludington, Michigan, the daughter of George Moore, superintendent of the Stearns Lumber Company in Odana and later Washburn. In Odana, Barbara's family lived near Picture Rocks, a mile and a half upriver from Odana. She loved to fish and caught northern pike and pickerel by fishing from the unstable log jams on the White River. She and her sister took the train to Ashland and back daily to attend school, starting at age 9. She then attended Ashland High School and ultimately graduated from Beloit College. Washburn folks knew her as the owner of the North Wind Antique Store that was raised after 2 vehicles accidentally rammed into it. Some may remember this. I don't have the date. She operated that store until the 1970s, when she must have been then in her 80s. She was also known in Washburn for her long career as a high school English teacher. She was petite in height, but not so much in girth. One student recalled that she gave in to her cravings for candy by sneaking it from her desk drawer as students worked on their desk assignments. She never knew that all the students were aware of her secret. As a result of her immense curiosity and quick mind, she learned to speak Ojibwa fluently. She counted as a great source of pride the fact that she was a personal friend of both Chief Blackbird of Bad River and Chief Buffalo of Red Cliff. She had even been given an Ojibwa name, Anita Kwaisins, meaning little white girl. Barbara Hayden was unusually intelligent, entrepreneurial, gregarious, and adventurous. She lived at 613 Washington Avenue until her death in 1979 at age 90. And then Alta Shipley Gustafson, born in 1899. This is a story of civic commitment. Alta was born the eldest of 7 and the descendant of a colonial English family. Her father had worked on the Brooklyn Bridge. She was educated at Fergus Falls, Minnesota, and was on a work-study program to pay for board and room during her high school years. She attended Duluth State Teachers College and taught for 5 years after graduation in order to enable her younger siblings to get an education. In 1920, she married Walter Gustafson and lived in the duplex next to the Foreman building. He was a well driller, and she helped with the business calls and bookkeeping, as well as serving as the office manager. Her civic contributions were prodigious. She was a member of the American Legion Auxiliary, serving as district office holder and state chaplain. She was a member of the Federated Women's Club. She was a member and then president of the PTA. She was an organizer for the local Girl Scout chapter. She was a member of the Bayfield County Children's Board for 5 years. She was a member of the Bayfield County School Committee for 15 years. She was a member of the Washburn Hospital Board for 20 years. She was chair of the American Red Cross Washburn chapter during World War II. And at that time, she organized and canvassed for rags and old clothes, stuffing them into gunny sacks and sewing them closed to donate to refugees. She rolled bandages and repurposed boxes from the DuPont box factory during the Second World War. And Alta was credited with saving Legion Park from development with the help of enthusiastic fellow citizens. The park was rededicated in 1979 after a hard-won agreement with the city. A maple tree planted by the Washburn Civic Club signifies her tremendous work building the Washburn community. Alta is the ancestor of the Bratley family. Now we come to Theodora Axelberg Anderson, born in 1895, and the early teachers of Washburn. Teachers in Washburn in the early days were bringing public education and civility to the community, but it was a rocky beginning. Many pupils attended school for as long as they could, but often had to leave school to help with farm and family, or to work and take care of younger siblings. Staying in school through the 8th grade was quite an accomplishment. In 1889, one student graduated from the Pioneer School, Fern Leonard. In 1894, the first graduate from the Pioneer School was Mary, I think it's Wagerly, it could be Wagerly, who read her essay, The Brownstone Age, at her commencement. One-room schools existed in many parts of northern Wisconsin, including Madeline Island and the Finn Settlement. My mother, Ada Soche, taught at the Finn Settlement as a 20-year-old young woman just out of Superior Normal School. She stayed with various families during the week and shared a bedroom with the girls in the family during that week, usually upstairs in the expansion attic, one side of which would be for the girls, one side for the boys. She walked back to Washburn on the weekends unless her brother could come and fetch her in his Model T. But the roads were often rutted or snowy and made it impossible. She had to assign chores to the students, from cleaning to wood and water hauling. Older pupils tutored the younger ones. Lessons had to be developed for all grade levels, and breaks for older kids had to be accommodated so that they could attend farm tasks that called them away. It's a wonder that any learning could be shoehorned in there at all. One of her goals was always to make sure that every student could read by the end of 3rd grade, and to help each student to function at grade level for as long as they could stay in school. And school buildings were a source of pride in the community, and we can see that in the architecture of each building, in particular the Walker High School, the castle on the hill. Teachers were also a great source of community pride. At the Finn Settlement, they would say, "Oh, we can't have any guests this week. We have the teacher, you know." Teachers were also a great source of community pride, but much was expected of them. Teachers couldn't go downtown to taverns and had to uphold the highest standards of behavior. Until World War II, women teachers were forced to resign if they decided to marry. So they attended dance parties in private homes, chaperoned, of course, but were careful about going out dancing or being seen in the company of a man in public. Well, Theodora Anderson was an exemplary teacher. She began her career at the turn of the 20th century, and she taught 2 generations of students in her kindergarten classes. Mrs. Anderson was a beloved mentor to young elementary teachers as well, and she taught her last class in 1971. Theo Anderson lived on East 4th Street for many years and was my mother's beloved neighbor, and she died in her 90s. We'll end there with the part 1 of the presentation, but stay tuned for part 2 in the summer for the Woiak Summer Festival. Thank you.
At this point, if anybody has anything to ask, just wave your hand a little bit, or something to add, story to add, or if you recognize any of the faces that Irene shared with us, you might help her figure out who some of them were. But wow, what an amazing program. And we know that you're a historian, Irene. We know that you love Washburn.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks will be our final program of this winter series, and 2 of the members of our Heritage Association will be co-presenting this. One is Matt Semno, who has spoken on he did a program on Slab Town a couple of seasons ago, and then the other person is Louise Strom Sells. Thank you. I knew I missed the middle part. And who is a Washburn native, and they both live elsewhere. Matt is a teacher down at Stout in Menominee, and Lucille works out of she's an architect and works just north of Milwaukee. But they both come back to and have property here in Washburn. They're both a member of our board, and when we have our meetings, they're on Zoom and continue to learn with us and contribute in many ways. So having that passion, they bounced an idea off one another to have a Tony Woiak program that would center on a variety of different homes or businesses in Washburn that may or may not have historical status, but nonetheless have stories to tell. So the stories will revolve around particular places and the variety of people that lived in and around those places over the years. So they've done a little research, and they're going to weave architecture into that and all kinds of things. And it's just one of those Tony Woiak programs that you never know what to expect with it, but I think it's going to be well told, and I hope you'll all return in 2 weeks for that. All right, then one more time, let's thank Lucille, and we'll see you at come. Irene? Where does that come from? Oh, I know, it's Lucille. Irene, thank you, Irene.